Thursday, everybody. Hope you're having a good day so far and having a good week. Um, my week's been pretty good so far. Um, just extremely hot. And for anybody who knows what it's like to work outside or work in a place that's not um, air conditioned very well, um, it gets really, really hot in a cleaners. And actually, I guess a few years ago, well, several years ago, I don't know how long it's been, they actually like did a poll and compiled a list of the hottest jobs in Texas. And obviously, dry cleaning, working at a dry cleaners, was listed high among those jobs. Um, because I think a lot of people, when I tell them, oh, yeah, I work for dry cleaners, I'm the manager, and they think, oh, you're the manager, so, you probably got it pretty easy. There's not a lot of stuff that you do. And while, you know, like the duties of being a manager are not hard, there's just a lot, payroll and, making sure people are giving it enough advance notice if they need a day off to go to the doctor or to take their vacation, and you're scheduling it to make sure it doesn't overlap or run in with anything else. You're setting up um, appointments for mechanics to come out and fix something that's messed up. You're weekly having to order supplies from, your supplier where you get all of your stuff that you use, and taking care of any customer complaints, anything. Um, it's a lot. And then on top of that, I don't just run the front. I don't just take customers and things like that. I'm in charge of all the money, making sure everything is always just right on the money, credit card reports and everything like that. And, you take in the clothes, you got to separate it properly, dry clean, laundry, whatever that is. Then you got to tag it. And that's all pretty easy when you're up front. It's warm, but it's not super hot. But when you're in the back, which I am because I don't just stay up front, I I know how to work every press machine. I'm probably the worst at jeans because I haven't done that as often. I only started pressing jeans um, right before everything like shut down, or right after everything shut down, and there was only two of us working the store. And because the business was so slow, he can't afford to keep paying all of us. And only two of us stayed, and we worked every day, and we alternated every other day working all day long, which is how we got the schedule we have now, which is why I'm off Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, because we just left it at that schedule, which we absolutely love it. We don't want to go back to working 5, 6 days a week. This is a great schedule to be on, and you still get a full time work hours. Now, before I was getting 60 plus, but you know, can't really help that. But being back there around the machines, you have all the steam and everything like that, and it gets really, really hot back there. So I would venture to say, and I'll look it up, but I would venture to say that if it's 100 degrees outside, then in the back, pressing or being anywhere around that steam, it's probably 130 degrees, like standing right there, doing some, being a part of the machine, working on it or something like that. Um, I would just be curious. Let's just see what it says. How hot does it get at a dry cleaners? I don't know if it's really going to understand my question. Yeah, yeah, it doesn't really answer my question. Let's see what it says. It doesn't say. Okay. Well, what if we did, what if we did it like this? It still doesn't. Hottest job markets. That's not what I was looking for. Um, I don't know. How would you word that? I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So I would say it's about 130 degrees back there. So it gets very hot. Uh, so for anybody out there that thinks that because I work at a cleaners that it's such an easy job and I shouldn't be tired and because I've had people act like that, like, oh, you shouldn't be tired. You're just, you're not just standing there all day, you know. I'll tell you like the most difficult part. Well, number one, I have scoliosis, so standing on my feet all day, you know, is really really bad on my back. However, with what I specifically do in the back. Now, I can do everything like I said, but when we have a full crew there, what I specifically do in the back is I touch up laundry shirts, which is after they go through all the machines, I take them and I get any wrinkles out that didn't come out originally and crease the sleeves. And sometimes we have anywhere from 90 to 140, 150 shirts on average. And um, that uses my right arm a lot, which is also the hand with the iron that I specifically have tendonitis in my hand. So I'm doing that motion a lot. So let's say 100 shirts, you got to do both sleeves. So you're at least doing 200 sleeves, right? And then on top of that, then you assemble, which I'm right-handed, so that's my dominant hand. I'm assembling with my right hand. I'm bagging with my right hand. I'm racking with my right hand, my right arm, and that motion continuously. And I don't just do laundry, I also assemble, bag, and rack dry clean. Um, Whenever my help that's there in the morning with me is busy taking care of customers and tagging clothes that are coming in. And it's really hard on your body. It's just that constant motion all day. It's a lot, especially like I said, when you already have tendonitis and scoliosis. So I've had people act like I shouldn't be tired. It's not like I do anything. I just stand at a dry cleaners all day. Well, that's for those that think that it's not that easy. And I'd like you to come try spending one day doing what I do and see if you can handle it. Not to mention, I'm working 13-hour days in this heat. So, in the winter times, it's not as bad, obviously, but the summer is when it gets really exhausting. So, just go try and do one day of what I do and tell me if you think you would start saying, you shouldn't be tired. It's not really that hard. You're not really doing anything. I don't like it when people do that. Anyway, just a little bit of a rant. I don't know why. So, today we're going to finish talking about the secrets that our government tried to hide, but obviously they weren't successful in hiding it because now we know about it. But first, we're going to do our daily promise, which says, thy faithfulness is unto all generations. Thou hast established the earth, and it abideth. Psalm 119, verse 90. God is a true measure of faithfulness, never failing. His goodness endures forever. His salvation is eternal. His nature is unchanging. His glory is to everlasting. Depend upon the Lord, who is worthy. I like that. I like Psalms. Psalms are just really, really good chapters to read. It's got a lot of good verses. Okay, so our first secret that the government tried to hide is allowing terrorists on a no fly list to buy guns. This is from townhall.com. And this was written back in 2010. And it says, the only thing stupider than allowing a known foreign terrorist into the U.S. may be allowing that terrorist to buy guns. Current U.S. law allows this to happen. It also allows known terrorists on the no fly list to buy guns. Perhaps worse still, the U.S. government has approved background checks for watch listed terrorists to possess explosives in the U.S. I wonder why. From March 2009 to February 2010, according to prepared congressional testimony from Eileen Lawrence, the Government Accountability Office's Director of Homeland Security and Justice Issues, 272 NICS background checks turned up individuals on the terrorist watch list. All but one was for a firearms purchase, the other was for explosives. One of the 272 transactions involved an explosives background check. I didn't even know you could buy explosives. Am I dumb because I didn't know that? Anyway, which was allowed to proceed because the check revealed no disqualifying factors under the Safe Explosives Act. Lawrence testified. Of the 271 firearms background checks that revealed the prospective gun purchaser was on the terrorist watch list, only 22 resulted in the would be purchaser being denied a gun. The other 249 transactions were allowed to proceed. Some of the watch listed terrorists allowed to buy guns were on the no fly list. According to FBI officials, several of the 272 background checks resulted in matches to watch list records that, in addition to being in the FBI's known or suspected terrorist file, were on the Transportation Security Administration's no fly list. In general, persons on the no fly list are deemed to be a threat to civil aviation or national security and therefore should be precluded from boarding an aircraft. According to FBI officials, all of these transactions were allowed to proceed because the background checks revealed no prohibiting information under current law. According to Lawrence's testimony presented to the Senate Homeland Security Committee in May, in the 6 years from February 2004 through February 2010, 650 separate individuals on the terrorist watch list went through NICS background checks because they were trying to purchase guns or secure a license for explosives. Because some made multiple transactions, the total number of attempted gun or explosives transactions involving watch listed terrorists who underwent FBI NICS checks during the period was 1,228. 91% of these transactions, or 1,119, were approved. What is going on here? The law as it currently stands does not prevent a known or suspected terrorist from purchasing guns and explosives in the U.S. As the GAO's Lawrence told the Homeland Security Committee, being on the watch list does not automatically disqualify someone from possessing or receiving firearms or explosives. Rather, there must be a disqualifying factor such as a felony or immigration violation. Daniel D. Roberts, Assistant Director of the FBI's Criminal Justice Information Services Division, told the Homeland Security Committee that the FBI cannot even necessarily stop a terrorist it has under active investigation from purchasing a gun. That seems a bit odd. When a KST is um, under active investigation, Roberts told the committee the FBI case agent is immediately notified and placed in direct contact with FBI NICS examiner to determine whether there is any information in the case file or known to the case agent that would disqualify the KST under the Brady Act from possessing a firearm. Since this process was initiated in 2004, approximately 1,200 such encounters have occurred, and in approximately 90% of those, no prohibiting information was found to deny the transfer. Okay, so let's say that they don't have any criminal or immigration violations on their background check, but they are on a no fly list. They are known suspected terrorists. And you know what terrorists do, they kill people, they blow up things. So, regardless of if there's anything bad on their background, just knowing that you suspect them to be a terrorist and what they do with their weapons, why would you allow them to purchase them? I mean, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Meanwhile, they're wanting to take guns away from law-abiding citizens who are not terrorists or even suspected of being terrorists as of now, but they're gonna anybody like this that they're just gonna freely hand over the guns to. Come on, this is nuts. This is why you can't trust the government, left or right, can't be trusted. Two things need to be kept in mind in light of these facts. One, the inalienable individual right of law abiding Americans to keep and bear arms. And two, the fact that this right exists so Americans can defend their other rights, including their rights to life and property, against, among others, terrorists. Foreign nationals who are known or reasonably suspected to be terrorists have no moral right to carry or purchase guns in the U.S. Exactly. The GAO testimony indicating that 650 separate individuals on the terrorist watch list had gone through firearms or explosives NICS background checks did not indicate how many of these were foreign nationals and how many were U.S. citizens. Does a foreign national even have a right to purchase a gun in America? I didn't think you could do that. If you're not a citizen, you can't buy a gun. This is nuts. I asked GAO if they could provide me with this information, but they were unable to do so by my deadline. It is a fair assumption, however, that many of these prospective gun purchasers were not Americans. When Timothy Healy, director of the FBI's Terrorist Screening Center, which runs the terrorist watch list, testified in the Senate Homeland Security Committee last December, he indicated that the overall list contained about 400,000 people, of whom less than 1% was on the no-fly list. Only about 5% of that 1% was American. Consequently, the no-fly list is a very small subset of the terrorist watch list, currently containing approximately 3,400 people. Of those, approximately 170 are U.S. persons. So, out of 400,000 people, only 1% are on the no-fly list, but 5% of the 1% are American. So you're telling me that the majority of the people on this list, suspected terrorist list, are not even American. 3,400 people, only 170 are U.S. citizens. Surely the foreign nationals on the terror watch list, not to mention those on the no-fly list, can be instantly denied any opportunity to buy a gun in the U.S. without violating either the letter or spirit of the Second Amendment. Well, yeah, because if you're not a citizen, the Constitution doesn't apply to you. Those aren't your rights. You're not a citizen. You don't get the same rights as citizens get. Do you think if I go to another country that I'm going to be afforded their extra rights? Of course, you have all the same rights that are equal protection under the law, but your constitutional amendments, your First Amendment, your Second Amendment, those only apply to legal citizens of the U.S. That's just how it is. At the very least, the Second Amendment only applies to American citizens, legal American citizens. I mean, maybe, yeah, sure, anybody should have free speech. I'll agree with that. So, yeah, I would just say that the Second Amendment only applies to legal American citizens. You may have immigrated, fine. You may be born here, okay. But you have to be a legal U.S. citizen to purchase a gun. That's just nuts. Do y'all remember back when alcohol was illegal during the Prohibition days? And people were having their little speakeasies and they were making their own alcohol, and the government apparently didn't like it. Probably because they weren't making any money off of it, which is what they tend to do, is not like something when they don't make money. So, this is about that. So, it says the main goal of the Prohibition era was to effectively enforce a ban on the production and consumption of alcoholic beverages. However, like most situations where there are set rules, someone is bound to break them. While legislation was enacted to curb the drinking in America, many argue that alcohol consumption rose to record levels during the Prohibition. Specifically, consumption was decreasing during the years before the prohibition and rose to new peaks as a few years after, with the prohibition still in effect. So, yes, you outlaw something completely that people enjoy doing that's been legal before, it's going to go up because people just like to break the rules. They like to be rebels. That's just kind of human nature. When Prohibition went into effect and there were a number of new problems, such as a drinking epidemic among children that had not been there before. See, it's the government's fault. And maybe that's why the government did it. Maybe they, instituted Prohibition because they wanted more people to do it. And when you make something against the rules, more people want to do it, and especially kids, because that's just how kids are, more so than adults. So maybe it was their plan all along to make us alcoholics. So, where does the conspiracy lie in all of this? Well, many people went to. Can you all hear the plane? Many people went to the hospital during this time due to alcohol induced illnesses. Doctors were accustomed to alcohol poisoning by then, the routine of life in the Prohibition era. The bootlegged liquor often made people sick. The alcohol produced in hidden stills, which were illegal by law, frequently came tainted with impurities. But this outbreak was bizarrely different. The deaths, as investigators would shortly realize, came courtesy of the U.S. government. Um, so this is a little picture here. So it's the FBI poisoned alcohol. The theory is the FBI poisoned alcohol during Prohibition. Why we know about it. New York City medical examiner Charles Norris was very outspoken against the poisoning program. So in New York City in 1926, poisoned alcohol caused 1,200 people to become sick, and 400 to die. In 1927, that increased to 700 deaths. Some estimates say that by the time Prohibition was repealed in 1933, the federal poisoning program had killed at least 10,000 people. So in 1920, the U.S. passed the 18th Amendment of the Constitution, banning the sale, production, and importation of alcohol. The Prohibition era was marked by widespread bootlegging of alcohol. Industrial alcohols were regularly stolen by bootleggers, redistilled, and resold. Law enforcement was frustrated that people continued to consume alcohol. The government redesigned formulas used to make industrial alcohol undrinkable. The new formulas included adding kerosene, gasoline, benzene, iodine, zinc, mercury salts, nicotine, ether, formaldehyde, chloroform, carbolic acid, quinine, and acetone. Um, the government hoped this method would scare people into giving up drinking, mandated that up to 10% of total product would be poisonous methyl alcohol. There you go. That's the government we have. Okay. Frustrated that people continued to consume so much alcohol even after placing a ban, federal officials had decided to try a different method of enforcement. They ordered the poisoning of alcohols manufactured in the United States, products regularly stolen by bootleggers and resold as drinkable spirits. The plan was to scare people into giving up illegal drinking. Instead, by the time Prohibition ended in 1933, the poisoning program, by some estimates, had killed over 10,000 people. The government redesigned formulas. Oh, okay, we just read all this. Making it toxic. Is that denaturing, denaturing? I don't know. Of alcohol led to a drastic increase in the number of ill people and deaths. Some anti-prohibitionists, including Missouri Senator James Reed and New York medical examiner Charles Norris, spoke out against this poisoning program. After the uproar created by these individuals from speaking out, the prohibition eventually ended in 1933. The bottom line is the FBI used lethal chemicals in an attempt to steer people away from alcohol, and the results were horrid. How do you guys feel about this situation? And a good book to check out if you ever get the chance is The Poisoner's Handbook. Huh. Okay. Um, there are some comments on here. Let's see what they say. Interesting enough, the U.S. still requires the poisoning of so-called industrial alcohol. Any spirits not intended for human consumption must be it looks like it's denatured, but I don't even know if that's right. Today, this is largely done by adding extremely bitter or otherwise unpleasant chemicals rather than the lethal methyl alcohol from Prohibition era. The stories related to the government never failed at amazing me. Our government poisoning its own citizens just seemed completely absurd. The problem with the large body of government and power is that what kind of charges can be placed upon it. Essentially, the government can do whatever it wants, yet its citizens are held to certain standards, which is completely backwards ethically and morally. This alcohol poisoning conspiracy is just another depiction of this. It's ironic that after Prohibition was enacted, alcohol consumption actually increased. With the current failure of the war on drugs, maybe it's time we looked back in history and tried to learn something from our mistakes, such as poisoning illegal substances is not an effective way to discourage consumption of said substance. Well, yeah, obviously it's not. Helping people would be a good way to do that. I was curious. Um, Their fact checks, and I wanted to look up one of those fact checks about this and see what it had to say. Um, and the USA Today fact checked, yeah, it's true, this did happen. Um, so it says $20, a $20 bill does not show. Oh, never mind, that's something different. Um, so we see 1920, bootlegging, law enforcement are having problems. So it says on New Year's Day, 1927, 41 people died at New York's Bellevue Hospital from alcohol related poisonings. Oftentimes, they were drinking industrial methanol, otherwise known as wood alcohol, which was a legal but extremely dangerous poison. That is from Time magazine. The federal government had required companies to denature industrial alcohol to make it undrinkable as early as 1906. Um, in 1929, enforcement of prohibition transferred from the Internal Revenue Service to the Justice Department. Now, ask yourself, why would the IRS be enforcing prohibition? What does the IRS have to do with enforcing laws? Unless, like I said, they weren't making money off of it or not enough money. So, yeah, so their ruling is that yes, it's true. It really happened. And they have their fact check sources. In fact, in the Library of Congress, they have one here about prohibition case study of progressive reform. That's interesting. I'll read that later. Not right now. We're going to move on to the next story because I'm going long. Okay, how about a short history of the U.S. government respect? Oh, that's not it. That's not the right one. Okay, we'll move on to this one real quick, and then I'll pull back the other one. So this is from ahrp.org, which is where I got one of the stories from Tuesday on. 1942 to 1945, soldiers subjected to poisonous mustard gas and arsenic experiments. So the U.S. Navy initiated, and this is around the same time, mind you, that they were also injecting citizens with plutonium. Same years. U.S. Navy initiated poisonous mustard gas and lewisite, derivative of arsenic, experiments to test protective clothing and anti-blister ointments at the Naval Research Laboratory and at the Army's Edgewood Arsenal. According to declassified records and reports, mustard gas experiments were conducted by the Navy at more than a dozen locations. The test evaluated protective equipment like gas masks and suits. 3 types of experiments were done. So, patch tests where liquid mustard gas was applied directly onto test subject skin. field tests, where subjects were exposed to gas outdoors in simulated combat settings, and chamber tests, where men were locked inside gas chambers while mustard gas was piped inside. This is from Secret World War II Chemical Experiments Tested Troops by Race, NPR, 2015. Caitlin Dickerson. So, despite evidence from a series of post World War I studies showing that soldiers exposed to mustard gas had suffered serious long term health damage, U.S. sailors were subjected to full body exposure to mustard gas and lewisite in a sealed gas chamber. The risks of exposure to mustard gas were well known by 1933. Do you see how it's all kind of going on at the same time? You have plutonium injections, mustard gas experiments, and also prohibition all at the same time. So weird. Um, well, prohibition had come up on an end by 1933. So, within hours of skin contact, huge yellowish blisters occur, and if inhaled, the same damage occurs to the inside of the lungs. The gas enters cells, damages the DNA molecules, and ultimately kills the cells. Skin tests were conducted under Navy contract at the University of Chicago on at least 15,000, possibly 60,000 recruits. The Navy did not maintain complete records of the sailors involved. Yeah, I wonder why. It only has surnames of approximately 2,900 sailors who participated in the gas chamber test conducted at the Naval Research Laboratory. Um, Secrets of Edgewood, a series of articles in the New Yorker from December 2012 to January 2013 about the military secret chemical weapons experiments on U.S. soldiers. The New Yorker obtained hundreds of secret military documents, raw data, and archival films under the Freedom of Information Act about human experiments at Edgewood Arsenal, which was an Army fortress of secret experiments. The U.S. Army Secret Chemical Research Program included inhaled mustard gas tests and a variety of other toxic, offensive chemical weapons that are not identified. A sign on a door in the medical research laboratories read, "What you see here, hear here. When you leave here, leave it here." Okay? Operation Delirium 2012. Mustard gas exposure caused a wide range of pain and humiliation for the soldiers. For some young men, the experiments were a form of torture. The test evaluated protective equipment like gas masks and suits. They were tested in a specially built 9-foot cube airtight gas chambers. Before the soldiers entered the gas chamber, they were told to line up, sometimes dressed in protective clothing, but sometimes naked, in single file by the door, each man standing a yard from the next until at the appropriate time they would all run inside. They had to run in to ensure that the door would not stay open for longer than 5 seconds. Beyond that, it was calculated too much gas would dissipate. Some soldiers experienced immediate and severe eye injuries and damage to lungs. "It felt like you were on fire," recalls Edwards, now 93 years old. "Guys started screaming and hollering and trying to break out, and then some of the guys fainted, and finally they opened the door and let us out, and the guys were just, they were in bad shape." Inside the chamber, Charlie Cavell's skin started to turn red and burn in the places where he sweat the most, between his legs, behind his neck, and under his arms. Blisters that eventually increased to the size of half-dollar coins started to grow in the same places. At the end of the second hour, the officer ordered Cavell back to his barracks and to continue wearing his gas-saturated uniform. That's just ridiculous. Most frequently, men had burns and blistering on the skin, especially in the face, hands, underarms, buttocks, and genitals. They were sometimes in agony for days, weeks, and even months from the enormous, grotesque blisters and oozing sores. In addition, the men in the gas chamber tests experienced intense fear. Finally, many of them also suffered long term health consequences, such as psychological disorders, cancer, asthma, emphysema, and eye problems, including blindness. No effort was made to provide follow-up care, even though many had severe adverse effects following exposure in the gas chamber, and the nature of the experiments remained secret for 40 years, until the Gulf War ended in 1991 when the public first learned about these horrific experiments. Even after declassified documents in 1993 confirmed the veterans' claims of injuries related to those experiments, their claims for compensation have continued to be denied by the Veterans Administration. Um, The number of soldiers subjected to chemical weapons tests between 1942 and 1975 is estimated at 60,000. Okay, that's not what that date said. The exact number may never be known because the Army did not maintain medical records of soldiers in the experiments. A federal lawsuit filed in California by veterans who suffered harm from the experiments alleges that 100,000 service persons were subjected to chemical or biological experiments without their informed consent. Neither the sailors nor soldiers were told that they would be exposed to toxic gases in a gas chamber, nor were they informed about the health risks. Yeah, that sounds about right. Absolutely. Um, the other one that I had pulled up, I just don't know what happened to it. Whoops. I don't know where it went. Oh, it didn't save it. Well, that's just great. Okay. So the other story was about exposing cancer patients with radiation. Okay, which one did I pull up? Which one was it? Okay, let's try it this way. Okay, well, we can try this one. I can't find the original one I found, but this is the U.S. government's secret 30-year radiation experiment on its citizens. They deliberately exposed thousands of its people to life-threatening radiation. So, a poorly attended ceremony took place at the White House on October 3rd, 1995. Hosted by President Bill Clinton, the event marked the official receipt of the final report from a presidential advisory committee he had ordered into existence the year before. Okay, in this picture it's a plutonium casting, atomic energy research establishment. I don't know. The committee was to investigate the U.S. government's secret program to expose human test subjects to radiation without their knowledge or informed consent. See, this is why the Nuremberg trials were so important. The findings were chilling. Oh God, I heard a dog barking. At least 30 programs beginning in 1945 saw government scientists knowingly exposing American citizens to life altering levels of radiation, sometimes by directly injecting plutonium into their bloodstreams in order to develop exposure data and plan for the effects of a nuclear war. I don't know if this is the same as just injecting pure plutonium, or if this is different because these people were specifically diagnosed with cancer. Children and pregnant mothers had been given radioactive food and drink, and soldiers had been marched over radioactive dirt at active test sites. In some cases, graves of the dead were robbed to secretly examine the remains of those killed by the studies. Virtually none of these actions were done with consent from the people involved. Huh. So this picture here is the first plutonium producer under construction, whatever that is. Plutonium was first isolated in the early 1940s during the research that eventually grew into the Manhattan Project, which produced the world's first atomic bombs. The metal, a byproduct of uranium fission, is basically harmless outside the body. Its alpha particles travel only a short distance through the air and are easily stopped by human skin and clothes. Inside the body, it's a different story. If plutonium enters the body as a dissolved solution or airborne dust, the constant barrage of radiation breaks down DNA and damages the body's cells as if the contaminated person was being shot with trillions of tiny bullets every second from the inside. And exposure to plutonium raises your risk of cancer over a lifetime, and high doses cause enough damage to kill over a range of seconds to months, depending on the dose received. On top of the radiation threat, plutonium is also a heavy metal, like lead or mercury, and is about as toxic as both. A 150-pound adult who consumes 22 milligrams of plutonium, or about 1/128th of a teaspoon, has a 50% chance of dying just from the poisoning before the radiation effects even come into play. Manhattan Project workers, ignorant of the risks, routinely handled plutonium with their bare hands and breathed in the dust inside their closed, poorly ventilated laboratories. As Eileen Wellsome, the Pulitzer Prize winning journalist and author of the Plutonium Files, told ATI, in 1944, all the plutonium in the world could be fit on the head of a pin, but as more and more plutonium was produced, it began to get tracked about the laboratories like flour. Nasal swabs kept coming back positive for plutonium dust, and workers' urine and feces emitted detectable amounts of alpha radiation. Nobody in charge of the project knew how serious this problem was, and animal tests didn't give very clear answers to how much plutonium was absorbed by the body or how quickly it could be excreted. Human test subjects were needed, and by the spring of 1945, they were available. So the first round of tests involved 18 patients who had been diagnosed with terminal illness. The idea was to secretly inject them with the plutonium and track its absorption and record the health effects before the subjects died of their pre-existing illnesses. Plutonium, known as 49 or product, was transported from the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory to the University of California, San Francisco Medical Center in solution to be administered via IV drip. This didn't always go according to plan, as in the case of 58-year-old house painter Albert Stevens. Stevens was admitted to UCS FMC in 1945 with a severe gastric ulcer that was misdiagnosed as terminal cancer. Given just a few months to live, on May 10, 1945, Stevens was administered the largest dose of plutonium any human has ever received, just under 1 microgram. The sample consisted of two isotopes of plutonium, one weakly radioactive with 24,100 year half life, the other highly radioactive with an 87.7-year half life. For the rest of his life, Stevens was given free medical care and more secret testing at UCSFMC as his health deteriorated. As the plutonium in his bones weakened his spinal column and his eyes fogged up with cataracts, the doctors periodically operated on Stevens to remove parts of his liver, spleen, pancreas, and lymph nodes. Nobody ever told him or his family that the cancer diagnosis had been erroneous. They simply assumed he had been given experimental cancer therapy and that it had worked. Stevens died on January 9, 1966, of a heart attack that doesn't seem to have been related to the plutonium. Over the 21 years that passed from his dosing to his death, Stevens absorbed more radiation than any other human being. 6,400 REM, or 60 times the government's maximum safe lifetime exposure. Wow. Until the files were declassified, Stevens was known only as Cal 1. Another patient in this first test series, known as Cal 2, was a 4-year-old boy named Simeon Shaw. Another test subject was a baby. And I think we read about Simeon Shaw. Um, thank you. So, yeah, this is still about the Manhattan Project. It's a little deeper, though. So the Manhattan Project gave way to the Atomic Energy Commission. Um, there was a letter addressed to the AEC chairman in response to a planned second round of experiments. And Hamilton, um, what's his first name? Joseph Hamilton, urged the end of human testing because it could damage the commission's reputation, and it had, as he put it, a little of the Buchenwald touch, talking about the Nazi concentration camps. His advice was ignored. The commission was flushed with grant money, so researchers affiliated with the research arm selected another 88 test subjects under the direction of Dr. Eugene Sanger between 1960 and 1971. Joseph Hamilton didn't live to see the results. He died of radiation-related leukemia in 1957 at age 49. The Cincinnati trials were horrific. Sanger picked test subjects from poor, mostly non-white groups of cancer patients and exposed them, again without a hint of informed consent, to extreme doses of whole-body radiation. Some patients were left on the table and dosed with radiation for a solid hour, during which time they were exposed to the equivalent of 20,000 chest x-rays. Roughly 1 in 4 patients died as a direct result of the test, and the rest suffered through the whole appalling rainbow of symptoms of radiation sickness: nausea, uncontrollable vomiting, severe mental confusion, and other neurological effects, loss of hair, loss of appetite, loosened teeth, mouth ulcers, and a dramatically elevated lifetime risk of cancer. Nobody really knows what Sanger was trying to prove in those treatments, since the type of cancer his victims had was already known to not to respond to whole body irradiation, especially not to lethal doses of it rammed home in marathon sessions. Justice never caught up with Sanger. A graduate of Harvard Medical School, his 30-year teaching career was unblemished by any hint of scandal. He won plenty of awards for his pioneering research, lived as a pillar of his community, and died in 2007 at age 90. His obituaries in the Los Angeles Times and Cincinnati Enquirer were fawning tributes to his contributions to science. This despite the fact that his actions became public in 1999, when the very few survivors of his trials managed to wring a $3.6 million settlement out of him, which works out to just under $41,000 per person who got a life-shattering dose of radiation, not counting legal fees. Eugene Sanger's work stands out for its appalling cruelty, but he was hardly acting alone. Dozens more tests were conducted between 1945 and 1975, always in the deepest secrecy and with endless misdirection and lies to cover them up. Between 1946 and 1953, for example, the Quaker Oats Company contracted with the Department of Energy to test some of the claims its advertising department was making about their oatmeal's nutritional value. For the test, Harvard and MIT scientists recruited 57 mentally challenged and institutionalized boys into a science club that hosted fun activities and trips to see the Red Sox play at Fenway Park. When the kids got hungry for lunch, they were fed oatmeal and milk that had been laced with radioactive isotopes of calcium and iron. Their stool was then checked for radioisotopes to work out how much iron and calcium the children were getting from their food. This information was then forwarded to Quaker Oats to help them craft ad campaigns that touted the health benefits of oatmeal. In another series of tests running from 46 to 49, an intended study maternal iron absorption, over 800 poor women living in and around Nashville were deceived into taking part in a nutritional study funded by Vanderbilt University. The Vanderbilt experiment, as it came to be known, saw pregnant women given pills with radioactive iron 59 and tested for iron levels on subsequent visits. When the babies were born, they too were tested to see how much iron had passed through the placenta, between 2 and 3%. The babies were also dosed with between 5 and 15 rads in the womb. While it's true that the small amount of radiation exposure is roughly the same as what you would get in 1 year spent living at a high altitude, such as in Denver, remember that nobody at the time knew how much radiation would be delivered to the developing fetuses or what the effects would be. It could have been much, much worse, and they were willing to make that gamble. It is also worth noting that the mothers were not made aware of the potential harm, nor were they recruited from Nashville's middle or upper classes, the groups more likely to the groups that were more likely to have lawyers. So, while testing had already been done on pregnant women, mentally handicapped children, and cancer patients, the Pentagon apparently felt it needed actual exposure data from healthy young test subjects to really get a picture of what would happen when Soviet communists finally dropped the bomb in America. So, the military knowingly exposed soldiers and civilians living near nuclear test sites to radioactive fallout. In the summer of 1957, the U.S. carried out 29 nuclear tests in Nevada as part of Operation Plumbob. These tests threw a lot of radioactive debris into the air, which then traveled downrange into communities that are now known as downwinders. Radioactive fallout dispersed on the wind, and the heavier bits settled out and entered the groundwater. Downwinder communities show a marked increase in thyroid cancers and leukemia, which may have killed between 1,000 and 20,000 people who would not otherwise have developed cancer. In order to test troops' ability to operate in a tactical nuclear environment, infantry soldiers were sometimes exposed to fallout by marching them through the test sites before the primary radiation had a chance to die down. During the Desert Rock, uh, was it 7 and 8? Yeah. During the Desert Rock 7 and 8 maneuvers alone, about 18,000 soldiers were deployed into the hot zone immediately after the test shots. A 1980 survey found that the exposed personnel had developed double the lifetime risk of leukemia and other cancers. Uh, hurry up. You're slow. Okay. The men who carried out this research were awfully cavalier about exposing people to radioactive substances, and they were even more relaxed about getting consent. But they weren't monsters. About the researchers' mindsets, Eileen Wellsome says, I think scientists who did these kinds of experiments were great at rationalization. They thought the studies were for a greater good. Whenever there was a nuclear accident, the scientists and doctors swooped in to study the effects. They studied the victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the soldiers at the Nevada test site, and employees injured in critical incidents. These studies were called experiments of opportunity. A Los Alamos employee named Cecil Kelly was fatally injured in a critically incident in the 1950s, and the doctor scientists rushed to the hospital to get samples of his blood, vomit, and bone marrow. They even saved his brain and sent it to a military institute. Convinced that most of what they were doing was either harmless or for the greater good, few of the researchers involved with the test ever raised an alarm or complained in public about the secret projects. Everybody had a career to look out for, after all, and nobody wanted to get in trouble. Besides, most of the test subjects were unaware of what had happened to them, and the majority were poor, black, or under military discipline and unlikely to complain about health problems that in any event most likely wouldn't surface until decades later. Exposing the truth about decades of government radiation experiments wasn't easy. Starting in the 70s, journalist Howard Rosenberg published a series of articles built on his Freedom of Information Act filings. These articles, particularly one in 1981 issue of Mother Jones, finally got some attention. The House Science and Technology Committee investigated the matter under the leadership of Tennessee Representative Al Gore. Hearings were held in secret and the names of participants were not disclosed. The committee's final ruling was that the experiments were, in the words of the report, satisfactory but not perfect. Sensing that Gore committee might have been a whitewash, Representative Ed Markey held hearings on his own and demanded that the nearly 700 victims be located, named, and compensated for crimes committed against them. Nothing of the sort happened. The Markey report got little news coverage. The Reagan administration successfully fought declassification, and the story quietly went away. While looking into an unrelated matter, Eileen Wellsome stumbled across some odd paperwork on an Air Force base in 1987 that referred to irradiated animal carcasses and hinted at data from a few human subjects who were identified only by code names. Over the next 6 years, Wellsome successfully dug out the names of the 18 Manhattan Project patients and tracked them down for her articles exposing the program for the Albuquerque Tribune. It was a series of high profile exposures, especially the living, breathing victims who had at last been named through Eileen's research, that motivated the 1995 Presidential Committee's report. After sifting through over 840,000 pages of material and ordering the declassification of thousands of documents, the committee finally delivered its findings. The report acknowledged that wrongs were committed, but declined to list any indictable offenses that could be pinned on any living individuals. The experiments involving pregnant women and disabled boys were dismissed as not harmful and ignored thereafter. Worse, no structural reforms were suggested to make sure things like this would never happen again in America. President Clinton expressed his personal sorrow at the misfortune of the victims, but stopped short of offering real relief. The October 3rd, 1995 ceremony got little attention. It was scheduled for a day a Los Angeles jury acquitted O.J. Simpson of murder. Oh, well, of course, people are going to be watching that. I remember watching that. So, yeah, let's do it at this day where nobody's going to be watching what we're doing. By the time everybody was done talking about that, news of the committee's report had quietly died. The issue has not been revisited since. That's nuts. So this is the kind of government we're dealing with, right? Um, this here is a short history of U.S. government respect for human life. Um, we're gonna go over this on another day. We'll do a whole other episode on the other stuff that our government has done because let me tell you what, they are some really corrupt people. They are. All this stuff, the Tuskegee syphilis stuff, the bringing Nazis over here, people who had committed war crimes that should have been executed, brought here to live amongst American citizens. Um, and there's a few other things that I want to talk about, but these are going to be episodes completely devoted to those subjects. So next Tuesday and Thursday, I will cover those. But I'm not going to give you any hints because I don't want you to go doing any of your own research. I want to tell you the story. Anyway, I'm just kidding. Anyway, I'll leave it right here. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I hope that you will join my Facebook, Lauren Collins. I just got to say something. Excuse me, you can email me, gotta say something 21 at gmail.com if you have anything that you would like me to talk about. And you can join my subreddit r slash just gotta say something. And if you are a blind viewer, please find me on Anchor, Spotify, Pandora, Google Podcast, Stitcher. Subscribe to the podcast. Leave me a review. That would be awesome. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like and share this video with all of your friends. Let everybody know what's going on and what our government does. Be prepared for other stuff to happen. I could almost guarantee that. And also, if you would please subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell so you know every time that I upload a new video. And don't forget to subscribe to the Scott Ford Show. Isaac Hayes, the Cajun conservative, and his Christian podcast, Brothers Just Searching. Nate Savage, I think it's Savage 5050. I almost called it something else the other day. And also TV's Rob is Unwoke. Great people. You'll love the podcast, I promise. Anyway, enjoy the rest of your day. God bless.